All right. Good morning, everyone. And look, I drove all the way up here. You can do better than that. Good morning. Yeah, good to see everyone. So, thank you for your patience. I think that you've already heard a little bit about where we were this morning. So, anything else by way of introduction?
Has everybody had a chance to read the judge's bio? Most of you? No. Would you mind if I read your bio?
No, okay. I don't mind at all.
Right. I won't take a lot of time. My name is Mark. For those of you who don't know me, I'm with the Center for Applied Learning. We put on one of these Dean Speaker events every quarter. And so this is our autumn quarter entry with the Honorable Judge LeRoy McCullough. We're very excited to have him here. Let me just read a few words about his career. He's currently assigned to the Adult, Civil, and Criminal calendar through the Mailing Regional Justice Center in Kent, Washington, as I mentioned. Judge McCullough began service as a King County Superior Court judge in 1989. This appointment and succeeding retention was preceded by his work as the Chief Hearing Examiner for Seattle Land Use and Environmental Issues, by his assignments as a State of Washington Assistant Attorney General, and prior to that by private practice. While on the bench, he has chaired such King County Superior Court committees as the Jury, Courts, and Community and Personnel Committees. In 2009, he was honored as Judge of the Year by the American Board of Trial Advocates and by the King County Bar Association. Judge McCullough is a past president and board member of the Lord Miller Bar Association, a life member of the NAACP, a proud member of the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, former chair of the King County Library Board, and a past executive board member of the Meredith Matthews East Madison YMCA. Former chief judge of the Mailing Regional Justice Center and former presiding judge of the King County Juvenile Drug Court, he considers himself a seasoned but progressive member of the Washington State Minority and Justice Commission and its Youth and Justice Committee. Judge McCullough holds undergraduate and law degrees from the University of Washington and certification from the National Judicial College in Reno, Nevada. Please join me in welcoming Judge McCullough.
Thank you very much. I was sharing with Mr. Openlander that I almost got stuck on Friday in Pasco. I was there for a youth and justice conference. Most of you know that it was snowing over here on Friday, so they were telling us, who were very anxious to leave Pasco, that we might not get out, that we might get to stay over there a little while longer. And I'm surrounded by all of these people in Eastern Washington that are these cougars, and I'm like, what in the heck is going on? So when I came back to Seattle, I just have to let you know that I did do undergrad at the University of Washington and law school there as well. And this is my first opportunity to have the pleasure of presenting at Seattle Pacific University. You have an outstanding reputation, particularly for people in business and education. So when I got the opportunity to come over, all right, I can do this. As Mr. Openlander suggested to you, I usually do these in the evening. But somehow he talked and maneuvered and talked to my staff. And the next thing I know, I'm here driving all the way from Kent to see each and every one of you. So again, thank you for your patience. What I would like to do is find out who I'm talking to. So, freshmen and sophomores, can I see your hands? Oh, that's most of you. All right. Those of you that are in pre-law, let me see your hands, that are thinking about, don't be ashamed of it. All right, thank you. About 3 of you. What about business people, those who intend to go into business? About 4. And the rest of you are what? What are you thinking about? Somebody tell me what some of the other disciplines are that you're engaged in. Anyone? I'm sorry? Political science. The rest of the political science people, where are you? Oh, okay, the healthy number. Any other disciplines? All right. So let me ask you to work with me on this. I need to know what your top 3 questions are for a judge. I don't know if you've ever talked to one outside of your traffic tickets, if you have any or whatever. But what I'd like to do is find out what those burning questions are. What do you want to know about judges and the judicial system and juvenile justice or whatever? And then we'll work our way through it. We'll talk about a few things and we'll go from there. Does that work? Okay. So, is this X? Okay. Questions you've always wanted to ask. All right, I saw your hand first. What is your name?
Padre,
Okay.
how did you become a judge?
All right. How? All right. All right. Very good. Your hand. Yes.
I'm Anthony. What's like the difference in like sentencing between like how the severity of it is like how is it compared to juvenile to adults?
Juvenile versus adults. Okay. So far, so good. Yes.
What does a judge do in like a corporate law case?
Corporate law. Very good. Yes.
How does a judge avoid implementing bias in decisions?
All right. And maybe one more. I was trained as an educator, so I enjoy just putting people on the spot. So you can either volunteer or be volunteered. It's up to you. Yes.
My name is Liam. How does your judgeship, I guess,
Your kingship is fine.
work with state government? How do you work with the state of Washington? Because you're a local judge, am I correct?
Superior County, I'm a statewide judge, but my assignment is in a particular county.
So how do judges get appointed in the state of Washington?
Okay. All right. How, and then appointment and selection. All right. Anybody else? Anything that's really, really burning that you want to add to the list? Yes.
Just along the same question as how, why as well. Did you become a judge?
Okay. It's like, have you lost your mind? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So here's what we're going to do. By way of introduction, I graduated from the University of Washington Law School, passed the bar eventually, went into private practice, was working with the state. I did administrative law for several years. And here's one of the things I will tell you. That was a joke, the earlier part. So I don't go out, oh my gosh, how did he took the bar for 25 years? I did not do that. In law school, my least favorite course was a course called administrative law. Exciting, like watching paint dry. You just sort of sit there. And a lot of us didn't really enjoy it because you're talking about regulations and businesses and so forth. And it wasn't the exciting, who shot John, who killed this person, what about the divorce, who gets the car, who gets the dog. None of that. It was about regulations. So it's like, oh, if I can just ever get out of this class. And I did. And guess what I ended up doing for 10 years after that? Administrative law. It took care of my children, took care of my mortgage, and all of that. All of which is to say sometimes you never know where your life trajectory is going to go. Some of those very courses that you just hate right now, that you think are totally and completely irrelevant, you may end up using those in a very interesting way. You may know that the Columbia Tower, which is that 76-story building, I was one of the ones who did the administrative and environmental review on that. I also did the environmental review on the treatment center. So here I am hating this stuff and then finding out that really if you just give it a chance, a lot of it really can work for you. So from that job as the city hearing examiner involved with land use and environmental regulation. I went to the Attorney General's office, and I skipped over the private practice piece. So somebody somewhere thought, well, you're such a good guy. You're so smart and you're so brilliant. You write so well. You really should be a judge. I'm thinking, nah, I don't want to do that. But I was given an opportunity to be a municipal court judge with the city of Seattle. At the time, I couldn't do it. Judges have to run for office. Does everybody know that? Unless you are a federal judge, unless you get a lifetime appointment, which is what the Supreme Court has, which is what the U.S. District Court judges have, there's these two parallel tracks that we have. One is the federal system, the gold standard, and then there's the rest of us. So if you go to the federal courthouse, you will see down at 7th and Stewart a most magnificent edifice with great library resources. And if you go to the top floor, it's got this commanding view of Lake Union. If you go to my courthouse, you don't have that. Over here, the judges are nominated by the senators and confirmed, and then they are appointed for life. Don't have to run for office. Over here, we are either appointed by, in Superior Court, the governor, or we can run for office on our own, just throw our names in the hat to say, I want to be a judge. Every 4 years, you as King County residents have an opportunity to vote on your judges. Every 4 years for Superior Court judges. And it's an expensive process. It's very invasive. You know what I mean by that? All of the stuff that you think that you left on Facebook that nobody would see, guess what? So you want to be aware of that. One of the things we talked about on Friday in Pasco with the high school kids is, and I'm the person that just got rid of a flip phone, so here I am helping these kids to understand that Snapchat is no joke. Snapchat, the picture may go away, but the image is there forever. Facebook, you may think you can delete it, but the image is there forever. We've had cases where police officers have lost their jobs because back in the day when they thought nobody would pull this stuff up, they were found on Facebook smoking a blunt or 2 or 3, holding a gun, or doing some other just really insane things. And then eventually the new commander comes in, let me check and see who I'm working with. They find out that officer A, B, or C had this in his or her background, and the next thing you know, there's a personnel meeting. You don't represent who we are, so we're going to have to ask you to do something else. So when I say invasive, it means that they get to go back and check all of your stuff. We had one judge who said that he had been married 3 times, and he said they went back to check all 3 of his mothers-in-law and in-laws and so forth and so on. So it is you have to talk about who it was that you've tried cases against. You have to give names of references and all of that. So having been vetted, and that's that word that we keep hearing from Washington, D.C., as if we didn't have vetting before. And if some of you are fans of what's going on now, I'm sorry, I'm very transparent. But I think that justice requires people to speak up. So if you're uncomfortable, I'm sorry. But we've had the vetting before, and so we get vetted. Then I get to be interviewed by the governor of the state of Washington, Booth Gardner at the time, who wants to know not about these different cases, but they just want to know who you are. Do you have the kind of values that would represent that particular administration? Are you going to be fair? Do you understand those things about bias and so forth? And so I was at my work in my administrative law capacity. I get this call from the governor's office. Now, some of you have friends who are pranksters, yes? One of my friends was a classic prankster. He would call and leave messages like, this is Mr. Lyons. And so you call back and you say, who is this? Well, this is Harry Lyon. I was like, okay, that's pretty corny. Don't do that. So I thought that this person calling my office was his roommate who just does this crazy stuff. So I get on the phone, I'm ready to just give him the what for, and this voice says, this is the governor, and I'm going, ah, and it really was the governor. So how would you, I enjoyed the interview, how would you like to be a judge? And so at this point, I have to be cool and regain my composure. Let me think about it. So let me confer with my family. And that's what I did, knowing full well that there could be an election, an expensive election, to retain that seat the very next year. But I didn't have an opponent, and so I accepted the appointment. So from 1989 until now, I've been serving as one of your King County Superior Court judges. Part of what I've done, I spent a lot of time in juvenile court. Superior Court judge, Superior Court is divided up into three major entities. You have your facility downtown Seattle, which is, you have your criminal cases there, your civil cases there, your family law cases there as well. That's at 3rd and James. And then you have your juvenile court in Seattle. Who asked about juvenile? That was you. Okay. Juvenile justice in this state, very fascinating. In juvenile court, if you're charged with something and you're 18 years or under, your case, in most cases, will go to juvenile court. It will not go to adult court in most cases. If, however, you're between 16 and 18 and you're charged with a high-level offense, sometimes they can charge you as an adult. And then you don't get the protections of juvenile court, you get to go to adult court. Some of you are political science people. What do you think the difference would be between juvenile and adult court? What are some differences? Just give me some ideas. What do you think? Do I need to start calling on people? Yes.
Less harsh sentences.
Less harsh sentences. So, for example, as an adult, when I began criminal work, you could get between 21 to 27 months for delivering a small amount of what was considered to be cocaine. I don't use cocaine, you don't either, but you have to decide whether or not that punishment is worth spending $30,000 a year per person. And that's what it costs in the state on the average to keep somebody locked up, about between $30,000 and $35,000 per year per person. If you're older, like me, they have, check this out, they have a geriatric unit in the prison. And I went to this place in Eastern Washington where there were people rolling around in wheelchairs. I mean, they could barely walk or whatever, but they were a threat to society. And you as taxpayers were paying close to $70,000 a year per person for those individuals. We're not questioning whether or not people were convicted. I'm not saying that. Don't go out of here and tell your parents the judge said everybody's innocent, because they're not. But you do have to make some balance as to whether or not society ought to use those resources in a different way. That same juvenile, though, might not get but 30 days because we have considered that juveniles, any of you studied adolescent brain development? Who has? Anybody? What do I mean by that? Yes?
Your brain doesn't fully develop until you're 25, 27 for guys.
Right. So the whole time that you're starting to behave as a juvenile, that's why you're a juvenile, because you're going to act like a juvenile. That's why we have a juvenile court. So it doesn't make sense for us to expect young people to act like adults. They are not. They are not. You are not. You know what you acted like when you were 13 and 14. Come on. We can front if we want, but the reality is a lot of us made mistakes that kids make when they're that age. So that's why we have a juvenile court. The juvenile court, when you're charged with an offense here, you don't get a jury trial. You get a judge, somebody that's kind and gentle like me, or whatever, and it's a smaller courtroom. You get surrounded by social workers. You get surrounded by people who understand whether or not you have a substance abuse issue, whether or not your situation at home is unhealthy. Let me just put a pin in that and tell you that one of the most outrageous cases I had, and I felt really bad about it, there was a young man that was caught selling dope when I was presiding at juvenile court. So the law said that the individual had to go to what they call Juvenile Rehabilitation Administration. In other words, if your sentence is longer than 30 days, there's another facility that they send you to, Echo Glen and some of those other places, and then they have schooling and so forth. But if your sentence is less than 30 days, you can stay down at 1211 East Alder. This young man was in fact caught selling dope. And some of you would just be horrified. How dare you do that? You know, you had other choices. What we found out was that he was living with a dad who was a single parent. What we found out was that the dad had invested all of the dad's money in a roofing contract. What we found out was that the guy that took the money ran off with the money. What we found out was that that meant that there was no roof on the house and that they were living in rain and bad weather without the protection of a roof. So this young man, in his own way, decided he was going to help his family. Unfortunately, the way he chose is not one that you would choose, is not one that I would choose. But you need to be able to understand where people are coming from. Would you agree with me on that? So I gave him whatever low sentence I could because I didn't think he was a hardened criminal. This was one of those circumstances. Back to the adult court, one of the worst cases I had was involving, again, people getting high. Alcohol, dope, all that stuff is just nuts. You don't need it. It just causes problems. These young guys who were supposed to be friends were running around, you know, having fun. And then so 3 of them decided that they were going to make an example of person number 4, who happened to be a little, you know, kind of like the fat guy and kind of like the goofy one. And it got out of control. The 3 co-conspirators then decided that they would just start punching kid number 4. And it got good to them, and they began to beat him and beat him and beat him, almost to the point that the kid lost his life. They realized that the victim was in a bad situation, so instead of taking the kid to the hospital, they took the kid to a local creek, rolled his body down the creek, and there were, well, maybe 2-3 feet of water down there, but they had beat him so bad that the kid could not even lift his head up out of the 3 feet of water. So the kid drowned. To make matters worse. So the guys who beat him, they ran away and they decided they needed to get out of town. But they had to come take one more look to see if he was still down there. And he was down there, and I just gurgling, trying to survive. They got in the car and left. And that person was a victim. That's what happens in adult court. And so, of course, there's a standard framework that's set up for that kind of behavior. And within that framework, I have some discretion, whether it's 5 days or 20 days or 5 years or 20 years, I get to decide. And in a brutal situation like that, I'm just as kind and compassionate as the next person. But if you take advantage of somebody and I think that you did it, you get what you get. So, so that's juvenile versus adult. I will also tell you that in juvenile court, there is a subdivision for people who have substance abuse issues. It's called juvenile drug court. I managed that court for a number of years, and these are young people who commit crimes because they have been addicted to substance abuse. How many of you think that people just want to get high as a young person? How many of you think that people just do that and there's no real reason for it? Okay, there's a couple of you. How many of you think that sometimes there are other factors that compel or that encourage a person to use dope? Yeah, and that's what we found out, that a lot of these young people sort of got roped into it. They thought they didn't have a choice. They really kind of did. But between the ages of 11 and 13, that's when a lot of them actually start. And that's when a lot of this aberrant behavior begins. That's when the brain hasn't really formed, so you don't know anything about long-term consequences. So if you start looking at the brain, and some of you in political science, you're going to have to do this, especially if you're going into law school. If you look at the brain and you know that there's certain parts of the brain that are responsible for what they call executive functioning, certain parts of the brain responsible for long-term consequences, there's certain parts of the brain that's responsible for like fight and flight, the immediate stuff. That portion of the brain, which is responsible for looking at long-term consequences, the prefrontal cortex, that's the one that doesn't get developed until you're like 25. So if I at 13 am making some impetuous decisions, should I be punished as an adult for doing that? Or should I have the opportunity to have people around me that can help me make better decisions so that when I become an adult, I can be more, I can contribute more to society? Cases that I've had in corporate law, it's interesting how that kind of crosses over. I am on right now what's called the Unified Family Court rotation. Any of you ever heard of that? Anybody ever heard of a divorce? Any of you ever heard of Jerry Springer? Okay. I'm one of the local Jerry Springer people, except that my cases are like the Jerry Springer cases on steroids. What do I mean by that? We have a special calendar where people who are trying to be divorced, who have children, they come before a certain panel of judges, and these judges have to decide where the kids stay, which parent, under what conditions, that kind of a thing. The judges also have to decide when these people are divorcing, who gets, as I said earlier, the dog, who gets the cat, who gets the house, who gets the car, and that kind of thing. And often it's who gets the business. So if you're thinking about going into law, some people say, well, I'm going into law school, I'm going into political science because I can't stand math. I can't, I'm going to do whatever I can to run as far away as I can. Don't do that. What you're going to find is that even in law, it's going to be very helpful for you to have a solid business background and to have a solid background in math. I have had to sit down and figure out who's lying with the assets, whether or not this person tried to dissipate, you know what I mean by that, get rid of the assets, because the more assets that you have, and I'll just use you as an example. Can I do that? Okay. So you're a wealthy man. You had property in the Grand Caymans, offshore, right? And as a rich single man, you decide, you found somebody that you want to be with, and so she doesn't have the same amount of money. So you write up this contract or this prenuptial agreement that says all the money that I have belongs to me as we go into this marriage. And then she says, well, okay, because I love you and I know that you would never leave me. All right, so things happen as they often do, and you folks don't end up getting along. Now you're in front of Judge McCullough, and we have to decide whether or not I'm going to grant the divorce and then who gets what. You're going to come in and say, well, Judge, I own this property offshore. She didn't have anything when we got married, so I want you to give me my property and give her that Pinto that she has been driving, and give me the house and just give her the, the studio or whatever. So all of that property, whether you owned it before the marriage or whether she owned it before the marriage, all of that property is before me. And even though you may have signed that prenuptial agreement, it doesn't mean that I can't go over and give her a piece of that property that's in Grand Cayman, because it's about justice and equity. And so I have to be able to figure out whether or not you're trying to hide that property from me, because I had one case where a guy knew that he was getting ready to get divorced, and I'm just saying guy because it's not, but it cuts both ways, all right? Cuts both ways. But a lot of the cases, they're the guys that are in the dominant position. And he tried to sell his car, his classic $30,000 car, to his in-law for like $10. So that would mean that the ledger would show that he doesn't have as much money, doesn't have as much property. And of course, the attorney for the other spouse had to go back and then undo all of that to show that that was a sham transaction. I believe that it was a sham transaction, so I put the car at $30,000 back into the fold. So I had to calculate all of that out, and she liked me, he didn't. But that's what we have to do sometimes, so we have to look at all of that. And just because you sign a prenuptial agreement doesn't mean, A, that it's valid, B, that it controls what happens to your businesses or to your property. In terms of bias, I have told people, I know you think that my name is Denzel, but it's not. But I am unapologetically an African-American man. And I don't want to lead anybody to believe that I'm apologizing for it. I am who I am. I have experiences, and they have helped me analyze things in a way that perhaps different people haven't, that different people don't. There are people who will say that there is no bias, you talk about it too much, we should just let bygones be bygones, slavery was 300 years ago, this, that, and the other, and I just say that's hogwash. Let's just keep it real. There are people who are treated differently because of their skin color. There are people who are treated differently because of their gender, because of their sexual orientation, because of their height, because of their... And I remember one person came to me in juvenile court, and I read this material. My kid has been discriminated against, and I'm so sick of it. So I'm expecting a black or brown child to come in, and a white woman came in, and she said that her child had red hair and had been discriminated against all of his life. Okay. Could be. It really could be. So I have to make a decision on whether or not the police officer who stops a person actually did so because that person did something wrong, or was that person pre-inclined, I should say, to stop a person because they were either black or brown. You have in this country, we have in this country, about 2.3 million people. 2.3 million people in the jails and prisons and the ice holes and the detentions and so forth at any given time. I believe the number is that of those 2.3 million people, there's about 1.7 million children who have parents that are either locked up or detained. So now it's time for me to ask you folks, What do you think might happen with the child of a person whose parent, a child whose parent is incarcerated? What might be some things that that person has to go through? What do you think?
They might have to do something legal to provide for themselves.
They might believe that they have to do some things illegal. Okay. All right. What else?
CPS.
What about CPS?
Well, if that was their only parent.
If that was the only parent. Okay. Yes.
They don't grow up with a positive role model, so they end up doing bad things.
That's right. All of that's true. Other ideas? How many of you went to your high school prom? Right? So how many of you had your parents there to take pictures of you in your tuxedo and your tennis shoes? That's what I don't understand that, but I guess that's what you kids do these days. But your tuxedos and your prom dresses and all of that. How many of you had your parents and family members just around you, just celebrating you, telling you this is awesome? Or having family members come to your graduation saying this is awesome? Now, on the other side of the ledger, you've got a kid who has to say, hey, where's your mom? And I see your dad at the PTA meetings all the time. Or where's your dad? I see your mom all the time. And self-image suffers tremendously. Tremendously. I have two wonderful sons, my wife and I. My wife has passed, but we have two wonderful sons. And there wasn't a game that either one of them was involved in. There wasn't an activity. One of the parents wasn't there, if not both. And so if you have a parent who's missing, whether because of detention or anything else, that's going to be a heavy hit for you. And you're 13, you're not understanding how to process it. So sometimes you end up doing things, making choices that you really shouldn't make. And so we again go back to this whole sentencing thing, whether or not we need to understand the background of the person who's going through that particular situation. Any questions so far? I don't know what we're doing time-wise.
I know some of these students are in class that ends at 12:20 technically, so for those who do need to step away, if you've got a few more minutes.
I do have a few more minutes.
Some of you want to stick around and ask a few more questions. That's great, but I know somebody may need to slip out.
Some of you have to go, but thank you very much. I'm expecting to see as many of you as possible in the UW Law School as opposed to any other. All the best to you as you go through your careers. Those of you that are able to stay, we're going to have some more conversation. So since I'm here, we're going to talk some more. Isn't it so bizarre? And so one of the things, folks, that we're talking about up here is the intersection between health systems and political systems. There was a case out of Louisiana where the children had brain damage, and they exhibited all of the symptoms of they were just all over the place. Found out that they were living in a low-income unit. Found out that in that low-income unit there were all kinds of carcinogens and so forth, and chemicals that were actually in the actually it was a lead paint. You know what that does. So a lot of the people that are low income ended up staying at places that are biologically unhealthy. So what happens? Somebody got a hold of this data and decided that they were going to sue the owners of this unit. Of course, the enterprise and defense lawyer said, well, the reason that these children are acting that way is because it's not because of the lead paint. It's because their mother was crazy and their grandmother was crazy and the mother before them. Plus, they're low income, and judge, these people, that's just the way they are. So whether you're going into law or whatever, you're going to have to know not only that math, but you're going to have to learn that basic science, because once you put the pieces together, you can see that the reason that these young people are acting that way is because of that very same health disparity that you're talking about. So law is a wonderful field in the sense that it pulls together so many different disciplines, and you get to look at the total picture to see how you can sort of make sure that a just result is obtained. But I commend all of you that are thinking about working into the public administration and into public health. Awesome work. Yes, congratulations. Yeah, thank you. You had a question. So we have a few minutes left. Questions, comments, outrage, whatever. I am who I am. Yes.
I want to know, are the judges' robes comfortable? Are they like, annoying to wear? Do the sleeves get in the way?
They do. They are comfortable and they are annoying and they do get in the way. One of the first, it's kind of comical looking back. It wasn't at the time. I was new on the bench, and of course I'm going out and ready to do my thing, and the doggone rope got caught in the door, and so kind of caused a problem, but you recover. But yes, and interestingly enough, it is by role or rule that we have to wear those. Just as in some of the British territories, they have to wear powdered wigs. And I'm like, I'm so glad I'm not there. There was another question. Yes?
So I hear you use the word just and justice often. But when you're determining when something is or isn't just, that's up to your own discretion. So how can you have like yourself and other judges all view something as just in the same way? And I guess that incorporates like bias. How do you like refrain from having bias? Because that can be perceived differently from person to person.
Give me an example.
So let's say that Barack Turner got 3 months, for raping a human being. So that was viewed as just for the person that tried him, but that's not viewed as just by myself. Does that make sense?
Okay, and yourself, are you Barack's mom or are you the victim?
If I were the victim or if I were in support of the survivor.
Okay, so the schedule or the grid for sentencing is basically established by the legislature, which is interesting. One would think that a group of super intelligent judges would get together to say that for a rape conviction, it should be this amount of time, or for a theft conviction, it should be this. But the legislature, the people whom you elect, they make those decisions. So they get down into the real nitty gritty. And when you actually look at some of the laws and so forth, there are a lot of lawyers in the legislature, but they make that determination as to what the sentences are for certain levels of crime. And then the judge's role is not to make the laws, but to actually apply them and to interpret them fairly. So sometimes we get stuck with laws that some of us believe are unjust. But our job is to apply the law pretty much. And then your job as members of the electorate, your job is to contact your legislator to say, this is not enough, this is too much, or whatever. Laws are really funny. And I'll tell you this, and having been on the bench since '89, so I'm not worried about some of the same things some of the younger ones might be worried about. When I was campaigning, one of the first things that they would always ask me, particularly when I would go to some of the Republican meetings, well, what's your feeling on 3 strikes, you're out? And they wanted me to say, well, I am in favor of it, and I'd lock them up and throw away the key. Well, I don't do that. So I thought, well, how do I answer this question? And so I turned the question around on the person. Is a baseball analogy really one that's appropriate for human behavior? What's the basis for that? How do you know that 3 strikes is enough? Sometimes 1 strike should be enough, sometimes 4. So if you're asking me, do I believe as an absolute rule that 3 strikes is proper? I said, I don't know. Sometimes it may depend on the situation. But that's what the legislature has put in effect. And you will recall that sometimes that 3rd strike was something like taking money from a coffee shop, and then that puts that person in prison for life. Not only does that rob that person of the opportunity to get out and get an education, to build a family, to get equity in the house, to build a pension plan, but it also robs you as taxpayers of $30,000 a year for the rest of that person's life. And so the legislature is responsible for doing that. So when you are concerned about justice and so forth, it's one thing to look at the judges, and you should. And I invite all of you to come into as many courtrooms as you can just to go see. It's open. Most of the cases are absolutely open. There may be some closed cases if it involves some young people, perhaps some sexual assault kinds of things. You know, you can sort of figure it out. But most of the courtrooms are open to you. Go in and see for yourself what's going on, and then let the legislators whom you elect know whether or not you think that what they've done is right and proper or not. They listen to you, and the judges are sort of left with that. Now, in those instances where the law is unfairly applied, where you have to keep pushing, such as Brown versus Board of Education, where you have all of these people that were locked into these ghetto schools and so forth, the law may say separate and equal, but the law, if it's unjust, it needs to be challenged. And so you want to get the judges and the people that are willing to say, we need to take another look at this. Other questions? Yes.
As far as like interpreting, for example, Brown versus Board of Education was an interpretation of a different interpretation of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
So, just like in a case-to-case basis,
Mm-hmm.
how would like a law maybe be reinterpreted? For example, like that rape law. Would it be more specified for that certain situation?
Well, I'm gonna turn your question around for a bit, and I'm gonna stick with the discrimination case for a minute. There's a case called the Heart of Atlanta Motel versus the United States, a 1964 case. And I'm going to ask you folks to think about this. So let's say that you are a hotel operator and you just don't like Mexicans, just can't stand them. You took your hard-earned money and you opened up your hotel. And you have said, I don't want anybody black or brown coming into my hotel because this is my money. I'm opening this, and government, stay out of it. That happened in this particular case. And what do you think happened when the people sued? What do you think happened?
What year did you say that was?
The case was decided in 1964. What do you think happened?
They won.
Which day?
The hotel people.
Okay. Why do you think that they won?
I would say, like, are you talking about in terms of Brown v. Board or just the civil?
Just the whole civil rights idea, not Brown versus Board, that was 1954.
Yeah.
But just in general, I mean, these people, they have their own business and they want to let in who they want to let in.
I guess they won because I would say precedent was on their side, judicial precedent.
Okay, that's one idea. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, if, like, people that sued the hotel owners, like, on charges of, like, discrimination, if the government allowed every business to do that, I mean, that's not a society that we belong to.
Yeah, okay. Well, check this out. When you are white, black, brown, or red, yellow, and you're traveling from one end of the country to the other, Do you feel like you should be able to stop and get rest at a different hotel that's open? Everybody would agree with that, right? And I can tell you that in the 60s and the 50s and the 40s, a lot of black people had a special book that told them which hotels they could stay in. And I don't know if any of you have ever driven across country, but sometimes when you gotta go, you gotta go, right? And so the question is, should you be able to use that facility that's open to other members of the public versus should you, as a person who owns that property, should you have the authority to say who should and should not come in? You were talking about how the law could be used. What clause of the U.S. Constitution do you think was used in order to get the hotel to open that hotel up to everybody that was traveling?
14th Amendment.
Keep going. You're warm.
Oh, the clause, the Equal Protection Clause.
Yes, and there's another one.
I think the general welfare clause. Right?
Starts with the letter C.
Oh, the
Due
commerce.
process, right?
Commerce.
Oh, the commerce.
Commerce. So the federal government says, if you are open for business, you're open for business. And we have the right to regulate commerce between the states. And your right as an individual is subject to the right of the country to regulate commerce. And if you are telling me, and this was a fascinating case, this was a 216-unit motel in Atlanta. They had 75% out-of-state clientele. This owner by the name of Morton Rolston filed suit claiming that the act exceeded the provisions granted by the Commerce Clause. It violated his Fifth Amendment rights. And check this out. He claimed that the 13th Amendment allowed him to do this. Now, the 13th Amendment says you can't be in involuntary servitude. So he says that by making me accept people that I don't want, you're making me a slave. I mean, it is just like craziness. When you read the case, that's what it's about. So the U.S. Supreme Court in this particular case upheld the permanent injunction, meaning stopping that behavior, and required the Heart of Atlanta Motel to receive business clientele from all races. But it's interesting that it wasn't the Equal Protection Clause, it was the Commerce Clause. It was business that was used in order to make sure that these business owners understood what time of the century it was, kind of a thing. So, but that's if you want to look it up, I mean, I'm not making this up. Truth is stranger than fiction. Heart of Atlanta Motel versus U.S. 397 U.S. 241, 1964 case. So that's when you use a different law that may not appear to be the one that fits. We've got about 5 more minutes. I have about 5 more minutes before I head south. Any other quick questions? I can tell you that if you want to come out to spend some time at the courthouse, you're welcome to. Anytime, just call my bailiff. As I said, Mr. Opelander knows how to get through to my staff. Other people have been trying for years to get to me, but he was able to do that. Yes.
So here's a question. One of my friends who's a prosecuting attorney used to say there's a difference between justice and the law. Mm-hmm. And do you agree with that? And if so, what's the difference between justice and the law?
Well, I think that I do agree with that, because the law sometimes is what people think the standard should be, and what people think the standard should be is not often just. The law will say that, you can, well, I grew up in an era of segregation in the South. The law will say that black people can't use the public library. The law will say that people in Seattle can't buy houses except in the Central District. And I will tell you that in Seattle and in Olympia and in places all around, the law said that there were certain places that you could not live if you were not white. I hasten to say that because some of us believe that all of those negative things are reserved to South Carolina and Mississippi and Texas and in the city of Seattle. Until 1968, there was a restrictive covenant in the laws of the state or of the city, which allowed landowners to restrict residency by people who were non-white. So if you worked for a white family, and if you were black, brown, or Asian, or Jewish, you could be in that community, but otherwise, the law said you weren't to be there. When Dr. King was killed in April of 1968, it was then and only then that the City Council of the City of Seattle actually repealed or passed a law. It was called the Fair Housing Law, which said that people have a right to live wherever they wanted to live. And so it's called restrictive covenants. You can look that up. As I said, from Olympia to Seattle, they're all over the place. But that's law, but it's not justice. Other quick questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. Come on out. See me sometime.